Thank you, Warren, and thank you to the choir for an additional anthem this morning. That particular hymn was also used in the inaugural service and reflected the gift from our Presbyterian friends, that being the Psalms. So thank you. Well, let me preface what I have to share today with some words of clarification. Whereas our hope on any given Sunday is to craft a message that will inspire, lift up, or pause the anxiety of some in the pews, today's focus will be more in the context of gratitude as we look at the coming into being and the life of our denomination, a reflection rather than a sermon. The closest Sunday to June 10th is recognized throughout the United Church of Canada as Union Sunday. And in our planning for summer worship, it was felt appropriate that we might celebrate in some way the union of churches almost a century ago that formed our denomination. I am mindful that we don't talk much about our national church. Our intersects with it are more in the context of changes in structure and polity requiring a membership or church council vote. For example, a few years ago, when there was a direction in the number of church courts from 4 to 3, and the presbyters and conferences were dissolved and replaced with large geographical regions, ours with the title Shining Waters. Well, the main interest in that development was financial, in that the change actually called for a significant increase in congregational funding to the national church operations. The last change of note was earlier this year with the decision to give the Indigenous United Churches autonomy. I suggest that this was a further step in the journey of reconciliation. The history of the abuse toward Indigenous children in residential schools is a permanent scar on our denomination. This morning, I want us to use our imagination to take us back to that day, June 10th, 1925, when the United Church of Canada became a reality. Well, you probably agree with me that that picture doesn't give it too much justice. It's 100 years old, it's rather black, and it gives more an image of something somber rather than a celebration. Yes, there was much somber in its content, but indeed it was a resolution. Perhaps almost after a century, the enormity of the journey to union with 3 major denominations eventually agreeing to become as one is not fully appreciated. This was the culmination of an incredible amount of dialogue, discernment, disconnect, heated exchanges between church leaders, and intense resistance, primarily from the Presbyterians. Well, to study the opposition, which is not my intention today, one can only express amazement that those who had the vision for an organic union of 3 major denominations kept their eye on the ball and, notwithstanding the regular impasses to overcome, brought it to fruition. They were courageous, daring, and bold. If there was a path to sainthood in the UCC, then there would certainly be candidates to consider. To enhance this anniversary Sunday, we have crafted a service that includes several of the hymns that were sung at the inaugural service and the Psalm of the day. Psalm 118 reminds us that this is a day that the Lord has made, and we will indeed rejoice and be glad in it. That we should give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. Clearly a most appropriate psalm for that special day in the UCC's history. Tomorrow, June 10th, as Roberta mentioned, marks the 99th anniversary of the United Church of Canada. And as such, we enter the centenary year of our denomination. It was a remarkable achievement when the Methodist, Presbyterian, and Congregational churches in Canada united to form the United Church of Canada in an inaugural service at the Mutual Street Arena in Toronto. It was what might be considered a grand experiment in that it is one of the only two church unions in the world of this magnitude to come to fruition. The other being the Church of South India, if you're interested in history. In Canada, church union didn't happen overnight after one weekend conference. It was a long and lengthy process that had its beginnings in the late 1800s in Western Canada, with the coming together of churches bearing the name Union that had sprung up in many small towns and rural locations, mainly as a result of immigration. Eventually, it became a serious and intense conversation and negotiation between the leadership of Methodist, Presbyterian, and Congregational churches. You know the outcome in that, whereas with only 2/3 of Presbyterians coming into union, the Presbyterian Church retained its own organizational structure and continues as the Presbyterian Church in Canada, a subtle change from the Presbyterian Church of Canada. In the past, I have spoken to the continuing diminishing of our denomination in every aspect of its operations. This will not be my focus today, in that, on the occasion that we greet the 100th year of our church, it is fair and necessary to highlight major benchmarks in its history. In particular, those that have contributed to justice and equality in society. Despite its many challenges, the United Church remains the largest Protestant denomination in Canada. And if I may say, this suggests that other mainline churches are experiencing similar membership and funding challenges. The focus must necessarily address what the next 100 years might bring forth and what our contribution will call for as a congregation of the United Church. As you can appreciate, 20 minutes or so is totally inadequate to address the magnitude of a critical and challenging subject. So today I will only scratch the surface. Without turning this discussion into a history lesson, I want to comment on what I consider are some of the principal benchmarks in the life and work of the United Church that we want to commend and honor today. These might not be necessarily everyone's key events, but I believe them to be of significance in the overall development of a new denomination. But first, I want to digress, if I may, and speak personally to the journey that brought me to this point in my life and ministry in the United Church of Canada. I had never envisaged that I would, or could, or want to become a minister. But things change in our lives, sometimes with a nudge from that mysterious spirit. As has been the case for many of us, we were introduced to a particular church or denomination by our parents and stayed with it until we were able to think for ourselves. Until we were able to think for ourselves. There comes a time when we are prompted to question much of what we have been taught and told by church authority figures. The result of such questioning often ends up with an exit from the church, and, in the words of the late Bishop Spong, we become part of that great church alumni. Well, my exit didn't happen that quickly. As most of you know, my early church roots were in the Salvation Army, and it took a long time for me to reject the evangelical message that placed a great deal of stress on sin and atonement, rather than on God's love that invites us into the fullness of life, or in the words from Scripture, life abundant. Well, my love of music kept me involved, and I was able to turn off the message until a long time later, when I became associated with the United Church as a result of employment in 1989, 35 years ago. Although as administrator of Timothy Memorial didn't require me to become a member, I quickly became comfortable with the ethos of the church and its historical stand on justice issues. It wasn't about a personal salvation, but a salvation for the world, not in an evangelical proselytizing context, but a reaching out to the oppressed and marginalized, the true intent of the gospel. And so for me, there was something authentic and attractive about our denomination, and I eagerly embraced its inclusivity and later responded to a call to ministry. I had found where I needed to be. Let me get back on track and briefly mention some of the events in the history of our denomination of which we can be proud. In 1936, only 11 years after union, the United Church ordained its first woman minister, the Reverend Lydia Gertschy. The ceremony took place in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. This was a major and necessary step to recognize equal opportunity for women in the full vocation of ministry. This development also made a strong statement to a male-dominant society of the day that treated women, unfortunately, as inferior. Within Christianity, this recognition of women in the fullness of ministry would have flown in the face of much recited words from the Apostle Paul, who made clear in his writings that women in the church should essentially keep quiet. Much later in the timeline, in 1988, the UCC addressed the delicate subject of sexuality. The General Council's statement was bold and daring and created strong opposition. Let's take a look at that statement. The General Council of the United Church of Canada declares that all persons, regardless of sexual orientation, who profess their faith in Jesus Christ are welcome to be or become members of the United Church of Canada, and that all members of the United Church are eligible to be considered for ordered ministry. Yes, a costly but necessary move towards justice and inclusivity. The denomination lost over 70,000 members, but another courageous development. The United Church remains a flag carrier out in front on justice issues. It was only a few months after this declaration that I joined the staff of Eaton Memorial and experienced some of the fallout. But I do recall a little ray of hope in the cloud of the divisive environment when bumper stickers started to appear with the message, "Proud to be united." Proud to be united. Yes, there were many who recognized and supported the necessity of the church's decision. In June 2005, the federal government passed same-sex marriage legislation, which also created heated opposition within membership. The UCC moderator, at the time a very wise leader, the very Reverend Peter Short, sent a pastoral letter to all United Church congregations. He noted that the topic was too divisive. He urged church members not to simply be for or against the issue. Take a look at the next slide. Peter said, this would be a bad time to be carried off by songs of victory or by the laments of resentment. That is really eloquent. Let us not be carried off by songs of victory or by the laments of resentment. Beneath the louder music of public ideology, there is a gospel invitation that is being sounded, an invitation to a great banquet. And blessed is anyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God. Does this sound to you like the concept we often mention here at LPCC of being a big tent room for everybody? Not only has the United Church been consistently passionate concerning justice issues, it has responded with financial campaigns for world catastrophes, such as the global HIV/AIDS pandemic and the devastating tsunami that struck Asia and East Africa. The United Church is an active member of the World Council of Churches and the Canadian Council of Churches. It issues positional statements on political matters and world conflicts. However, we need to recognize that there is a general lament among all of the Church Universal that its voice has diminishing influence on society than it did in earlier decades. The history of the United Church of Canada is a continuing essay in advocacy to make a better world. I refer you to the next slide. At this point in its history, it has articulated a statement on its future which really stands as a continuing commitment to how it has conducted itself over its first 100 years. The statement speaks to a three-pronged approach or emphasis on what will inform the Church's forward vision and agenda. Deep spirituality is the heart of our identity, not just as a church, but also as individuals. Bold discipleship is living the call to love our neighbors, no matter the cost. And lastly, daring justice is the commitment to join others in the changing world. Well, as a congregation of the United Church, Lawrence Park Community Church is truly blessed. We are not experiencing any of the challenges many of our sister churches are faced with. We have financial and human resources to support a vibrant worship life and an extensive variety of programs helpful to the well-being, spirituality, and intellectual thirst of our membership. The COVID pandemic opened up opportunities that our leadership seized, especially in the area of technology, with live streaming that reaches to a world far beyond this sanctuary. We are growing in our membership. We continue to reach out, welcome, and include all who come through our doors, not to seek their financial support, but rather to meet them where they are, to meet their needs. In summary, we are beating the unfortunate and discouraging trends that are widespread in our denomination. Let us, along with our neighboring United Churches across this land, continue to be bold and daring in advocacy as we respond to the simple question as to what God requires of us and of our denomination: to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly as we engage in a world in great need. That is the unchanging mission of the church in which we are privileged to share. Let us rejoice and be glad.